Hey guys, so this video is pretty much going to be a deck profile for Sakazuki. I think the key takeaways for this video is you're going to see a bit of a different build, and you're also going to learn a bit more of how to go about some of the best matchups, some of the toughest matchups that you'll find in this kind of 06 format before we head into EVO1. Currently, I think this deck is it's definitely a top 2 deck. I think your top 3 decks are GECKO, MORIA, Sakazuki, and probably Katakuri. I think me personally, I think it's kind of the second slot. I think GECKO MORIA is just a little bit better, mainly because of that 5 life. I think that's a pretty big difference between these two decks, but they do pretty similar things. But I think Sakazuki has a bit more combo plays that you could go off of. I think there's more maneuverability, and I kind of like it just because it does have a consistency factor for the base of the deck, not so much the GECKO MORIA itself, but rather the removal aspect of the deck itself. So I think let's go ahead and get into it. Obviously, we have our leader Sakazuki, pretty broken leader right now until it gets banned in about 2 months or so. So, you can ditch one, draw one once per turn, and on attack, -1 to anything. You'll see one tech card in this list that makes that -1 a lot more valuable, is one way to say it. So let's get into a bit of what we got going on here. So first off, we got our searchers for the deck. So I'll touch base on something a little bit later in terms of one slot that I would take this for, or take one out for, because I have no choice. So we got our brand new, we got our Toshigi. Brand new is a really nice, 2-dom play, top 3, grab a Navy card. The thing I find most important with this is it lets you find sometimes that one Navy card you do need, but also lets you fill up your trash to get your Helmeppos, your Surus, your Hinas, even your Luchis into trash. That way you can play off Moria. Toshigi is really nice for going first, and when you just kind of have that one extra Don that sometimes you don't need to use. She helps the consistency of the deck a lot. Get your Kuzan, get your Borsalinos, but most of the time you're probably finding your 2Ks with it. That's usually what you find most of the time, or you can get a Toshigi into a brand new. It's really just that consistency that kind of takes it to the next level, and it's also just a good Houndblade's target. +3 swing simple 5, just get a card out of hand. So these two searchers really help the consistency of the deck, and just kind of finding those key pieces when you need it. Next up, we got our 2Ks for the deck. So we don't run too many. We pretty much just kind of stick to the 8 and rock with that. Suru will probably always be here. Simple 1 Dawn, -2. Sometimes it's just the extra 2 that you really need, and kind of just rock with that. Virgo's an interesting one. The main reason is you can't search the 3-drop Toshigi 2K off of Toshigi Searcher. So we have another target, which is really nice. Plus, you do find yourselves in some matchups playing this down in non-removal matchups, because the only way they can clear this thing is by a removal effect, because otherwise 1 Dawn on it can't be KO'd by battle. So sometimes it just makes a really consistent blocker, or not blocker, but attacker. And you can also pick it back up off of Rebecca. So sometimes you can go GECKO MORIA into Rebecca, into Helmeppo, pick up this off the Rebecca. You just went like +4 with 1 card, and you kind of bolster some defense, and if that's what you need to live, then that's what you got to do. So those are our 2Ks for the deck. Only 8. You could try to find space for maybe to get up to 10, but honestly there really isn't that much space left in the deck, so we kind of just go from there. All right, and so next up we got our minusers in the deck. So we're on 2 Kuzan, 3 Hina, 2 Helmeppo, and 2 Ice Age. So what are the reason behind each of the choices? Kuzan isn't super necessary, but it's really good if it sticks. If you get a Kuzan to stick for like 1 turn into, let's say, your GECKO MORIA turn, or into a Hina Luchi turn, you're pretty much clearing any sort of big threat on the board. And that cycle is very nice. So definitely at least a 2 of, in my opinion, for this deck. GECKO MORIA, you can make arguments, but for this deck, that Kuzan is, your opponent either has to out it early, which kind of takes up their turn early game, or, it sticks on board and you get a lot of value from it. Hina, it makes sense to just run Hina. Very rarely you're ever playing it from hand. Your main purpose is to get it into that trash through leader skill, or, brand new sort of mill. And you're just that -3 or -4 rather, you know, you're pretty much clearing out a lot of stuff. Doesn't have counter, but it's fine, you know, that's what the leader skill's for. Just ditch, draw, get it into trash. Helmeppo is honestly such an important card in this. I've honestly thought about going like 3-2, 3 Helmeppo, 2 Hina. The reason I don't is because sometimes the -4 is just like that much more needed and it lets you do more stuff off of Rebecca. But the Helmeppo is super important to get off of that GECKO MORIA skill. Sometimes even like mid game or late game, you can pop this down and then play a Lucci and you're clearing, you know, from the -3 from this, the -1 from leader, and we'll touch on this in a second. Mid game, you know, just 2 unit clear pretty easily. And Ice Age is really for those big bodies that you're playing against. You know, when you play against yellow, if you're trying to clear your opponent's GECKO MORIAs, whether it's a mirror or the GECKO MORIA matchup itself. This card is extremely important. I've thought about upping it, but I think it gets a little too bricky beyond 2, and plus, you know, we run 2 searchers. We got the leader drop and draw 1, so it's pretty consistent to find what you need, and so it's a Navy card, so that's part of the reason why. So pretty much overall, you know, we got 4, you know, we got 9 minus cards just here themselves. So let's touch base on what I think is, I don't necessarily know if I want to call it the right way to build the deck right now, but it's definitely a way that is extremely helpful and extremely consistent. And that is the stage. We're not running Great Eruption, we're doing the stage. So the stage, if you don't know, is on play for 1 Dawn, you -1. And then it has the activate main, rest it, give -1 to something else. So the turn you play it, it's basically a Great Eruption without the filter. You get -2. But you have it for the rest of the game. So every single turn for the rest of the game, you basically have a Great Eruption where you have -1 for lead, -1 for this. So you have guaranteed -1 to 2 things or -2 to 1 thing. And so the combos you can do with that, you know, with the Kuzan, with the Hina, with the Ice Age, with the Helmeppo, you're able to get minusing very consistently every single turn. And you don't really care too much about the sort of filter that Great Eruption gives you. It's nice, but because of the consistency this deck already has through, you know, the draw 1, the leader skill, brand new, Tashigi, you're seeing your pieces very consistently. The piece that you don't see as consistently is kind of the 8-drop Moria. If it goes into the trash, it's honestly really unfortunate. There are some techs you can add in. Maybe you can add in some hogbacks if you really want to, but you know, as long as you see 1 Moria a game, honestly, most times you're really okay. So as long as you get that 1, sort of clear your opponent's board, gain control, go from there, it's really good. And this just lets you, on a Moria turn with a Lucci and a Helmeppo, you know, that's minus total 5 cost to, you know, 1 unit, or 5 cost to 2 units. So it really lets you kind of, you know, work around some of those restrictions Dawn wise that you would have with Great Eruption. And, you know, once it's on the board, you get a guaranteed -1. So it also helps with that consistency, so where you're not, you know, really needing to search for that Great Eruption to make a play happen. So that's why I run stage build, stage at 3. Wouldn't go less than 3, wouldn't go more than 3. You're guaranteed to pretty much see 1 a game as long as you're filtering properly with your leader skill at least like once every turn, once every 2 turns, and really just kind of go from there. And obviously if you pull it in hand and you already have 1, just leader skill it out and ditch it. You don't need it. And so after our minusers, we have our removal. Most of the time with this deck, I find that I have more minusers than I do have removal, and sometimes it's a little scary. So you could argue that the removal is a little bit more important than the minusers. So we'll start off with the new event, Ama. So this card is basically Lucci, but bot deck and an event. You could argue that Lucci is a bit better to do if you have the Dawn for both, just because you get that body on board, but sometimes you don't want to KO something, especially against GECKO, since they'll be able to revive and get those kind of Perona, you know, Absalom effects. And if you can bot deck their stuff so they don't have targets in trash, that's super helpful. A couple targets, whether it's the mirror match as well, that's really good. But, you know, sometimes you don't have the extra 2 Dawn to play Lucci. You have 2 Dawn late game, you need to get rid of a blocker really quickly. This card comes in clutch. You know, the trigger effect, you know, activate main, sometimes honestly, you're never really going to trigger that unless they have like 2 drop blockers on board, or you're playing against Zoro or something like that, but Zoro is pretty faded. So this card is really good right now. I think 2 is fine. I've seen some lists run 1. I think 2 is the correct choice because you really need to see those removal cards, especially early. If Sakas gets swarmed early, then it can be a little rough. just because you're 4 life and you kind of want to dominate that mid to late game. And next up, controversial card is Houndblaze. We got 4 Houndblaze, so everybody knows it. Bot deck 2 or less, increase something by 3k, really good value. Sometimes the trigger effect comes up where you bounce maybe a threat to hand for next turn that you can't defend out of. That's really nice. But just that bot deck, sort of get around that KO on KO effects and increase power. It's really good, really consistent, and that's the nice thing about this package is the fact that it is searchable by your 8 searchers in the deck, which I will be to 7 at some point after I explain. But yeah, those are really good. And then we have the 4 Lucci and the 1 7-drop Borsalino. We'll start off with the 4 Lucci. I was running 3 for a bit, and every single time I needed that 1 more Lucci, I never had it. So Lucci out of 4 of is just extremely important. You really need to get him in the trash, if anything. That way you can combo him off of Moria. So if you can get Lucci into the trash, combo it off Moria, like you're in a really good spot. Even if you use it early game, most of the time you don't use it early game. Most of the time you save it for late game. But honestly, such a good card. Clear 2 bodies, clear 2 threats. Gain a body. You just get a lot of tempo off this card. And 7-drop Borsalino. I've seen a lot of lists not run it. I think minimum of 1 is the correct choice because you are in this set forced to go first a lot of times. Sometimes you actually even want to go first. I think going first against Moria it might end up being better. It's debatable. So if you can see this, which honestly you see the one of pretty consistently. You're filtering, you're searching. This comes up very often. And being able to play that 7, let's say you have leader skill and you have stage on board, you're on going first curve, going 7, you can bot deck a 6-costed unit. Most of the time you'll probably bot deck a 5-costed. But being able to get that 1 body off the board and establishing an 8k body, it's very strong. It's very difficult for your opponent to remove this effectively. So I think a 1 of is extremely important. I think it's useful. And it kind of just rounds out the nice, these are all low end removal. This is like for that. If you don't have that ability to get something down to 2 and you have this in hand, like it's a nice option. So yeah, we've run, what is that? 6, 10, we've run 11 removal cards. I think 11's pretty good. I've thought about increasing this, but even this to 2. But for now, 11, I like 11 removal cards. It's very helpful and it kind of just gets the job done. And all these cards are super important. These cards in particular, late game, like straight out just win you games against any black deck. Borsalinos, Hinas, removes them out. Extremely, extremely important. Next up, we got a bit of the more, defensive package. We got our 4 Hinas, or Rebecca's rather. We got 2 Borsalinos and 2 Sabos. The reason behind this is Hina, if you play it off of GECKO, you're pretty much going plus 3, plus 4. You play something off Hina, you get something to hand, stuff like that. You can even just do the usual, the go-to, Hina Lucci combo, 8 Dawn, lets you clear something with Rebecca, Hina Lucci Rebecca. Just really good, really consistent, and red isn't super prevalent, so you don't have to worry too much about the low cost or the low power. So 4 costs, your opponent's gonna have to remove it in some fashion or just swing in. You get a free block. You already got the value out of it. 2 Borsalino. I've gone between running 4 of this and running 0 of this. The reason behind 4 is, super good blocker, searchable, just a good body, and only really against the mirror do you have to worry about it, being bot decked. Otherwise, like, your opponent doesn't have any really good way to remove it. The reason for 0 is just kind of make some more space within the deck to run some more, tech options, more pieces. But I found that 2 is just really nice because, you see it consistently enough through all the searching, all the ditching, and it sticks a lot, throughout the game. It's just kind of a good body on the board. It just sticks. The only downside to it is because how popular yellow is, you can just tap it with Amaru, rest it, and, if this is your only defense late game against yellow, I mean, you don't have a very good chance of winning that game just because it's very removable. So I think 2's good early game, really good blocker, really good defense. But that's kind of where Sabo comes into play. I think 2 of Sabo is like minimum. I've thought about going up to 3. This card is so good in this meta. in the mirror, in the GECKO matchup, you know, being able to basically shut down an 8-drop MORIA turn if you play this the turn before, your opponent can't clear your board. And only against, you know, black or Sakazuki rather can they bot deck it. That's really the only way around this. Against yellow, they can't go for game if you play this. They can't, you know, they can't KO it with the new event that comes out. They can't, you know, rest it because it's 5 cost. So this just really shuts down yellow and the sort of black/mirror matchups a lot. And it's a good filter. Get cards in the trash that you can play out off of GECKO, stuff like that. And, you know, 5/6, you know, we take it with the 1k counter. This card, if I could fit 3, I would argue I would. This card is just super valuable, but you usually get to it and you can cycle it back into hand off of Hina. So 2 is pretty good. I think it's pretty fine. It's pretty good. And now on to the best, honestly best card in the deck is GECKO MORIA. So what I will say, like I said earlier, this should be at 4. I'm waiting on one more in the mail, so I'm gonna drop Tashigi down to 3. I think 7 searchers with what Tashigi does, it's fine to go down to 3. Plus, you would rather have brand new as a Houndblaze target than Tashigi, so I think that's fine. So this will be a 4 of for sure. I think it has to be just because you don't have a way to search it in this deck. So you have this at a 4 of. You know, you're going, you know, 8, 12, 14 Dawn worth in 1 card. You're getting out 3 bodies. Like, this is just such a tempo swing. And the only decks that can really handle it is Saka or MORIA, assuming they can clear yours after you already played it. There's no real downside to this card. It's just, the only downside is like if you can't build up a wall or you can't handle the clapback on it. But if that's the case, then you can even call off Borsalinos, you can call off Hinas for defense. You can even call off brand new Tashigi, get those searches that you need to build up your hand a bit more. It's such a versatile card. It's honestly so crazy. So this is like a definite 4 of. I've thought about running Hogback just for when it does go in the trash to maybe get it back to hand, but there's space is tight. So I think 4 for what it is right now is fine. And this card is absolutely insane. So yeah, that's pretty much the deck profile. I think stage build is definitely, it feels really good right now. That consistency, you don't really miss too much with Great Eruption. And you pretty much save a Dawn once every single turn if you do need it. So I think that's really helpful. I guess some kind of key matchups, you know, you got to look out for is the Mirror, GECKO MORIA, Katakuri. Yamato is an interesting one. I think if you don't counter out of their first Yamato swing, you might just lose the game. Just because you're 4 life, they can kind of just go way too fast a little bit just with that pressure. So Yamato's a tricky one, but I do think it's very manageable. Red Purple Law is an interesting one. You're pretty much both doing the same thing, and whoever kind of maintains their resources for long enough, I think, will win that game. But I definitely wouldn't say you're disfavored by any means. But you have to play things correctly. Your consistency is better than theirs. Your late game is better than theirs. They can go a little bit faster, which is kind of scary, but if you can handle at least, you know, 1 to 2 units a turn, then I think you're fine. The GECKO matchup is, I think GECKO's favored personally. I think the main reason is that 5 life. They basically get an extra turn to play. And if they go first, they're pretty much a full turn ahead of you because they can get out the 4 cost unit on the 3 Dawn. So I think there's an argument to be going first in that matchup. That way you don't have to worry about ditching a card so early from the Perona. And it lets you clap back to their GECKO MORIA on your 9 Dawn that the one that they just played on the 8 Dawn. So I think I would rather be reactive to that than having to worry about clearing theirs after mine was just cleared, because that's always really tough. It's a resource game. It always will be a resource game with that matchup, or the mirror match. So you just gotta be able to handle that accordingly and really just think out your turns, think out your plays. If you can bot deck their units that they call off leader skill, that's like your best thing to do. Even if it's like a Suru off the Ama, you know, I saw that in regionals this past week. You know, GECKO player had his Suru bot decked and he didn't have the minus to play off of GECKO and he couldn't clear a proper unit. So I think even that is fine, just getting those bodies to the bottom of the deck. Katakuri matchup, that's like weirdly 50-50. It really just depends on their life. I find most of the time 10 drop doesn't really matter too much in that matchup, because either you're going down life fast enough, or you're able to push them enough to where they just don't have a board to kill you. You can. Sabo's really good in that matchup. Hina's really good in that matchup, just to build bodies, and also they can't pop your units with the new 4-cost event that I can't remember, the reject. So that's why that's really good. Yellow's weird. If they outpace you, you might be in trouble if they flood too quickly just off of triggers, but that's out of your control. Unless the only thing within your control is like, do you give them that one extra hit to potentially play an extra body? That's really what you got to think about. But other than that, I think yellow is definitely manageable. You're probably like slightly favored if they hit like 2 triggers on average. I would say you're probably like 60-40. But it's a good matchup. You should feel confident with it. And yeah, I think other matchups in the meta, you're kind of just doing your own thing. You're kind of just chilling. I don't think there's too much to worry about. There's not like really any hidden decks. Perona is an interesting one. Those games will always go late, and you really have to be careful of when you're tapping your leader out, because they might just 10 drop you and stun part of your board. So Perona's an interesting one. They'll try to just rest and clear whatever you play out. So you could argue maybe just swinging big the first couple turns and then playing out units later on is fine. That's one I have to do more testing with. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good matchups for this deck. I think it's still really good. GECKO MORIA I think is slightly better, just because it does have that one more buffer turn, and you kind of see your pieces a bit more consistently in terms of the 8 drop, because you can get that back with Hogback regularly. But yeah, other than that, this is the deck, and if you want to see any more profiles, definitely let me know in the comments, and yeah, I'll see what I can put together. And I'll probably be doing a GECKO MORIA profile, because it's between this deck and that deck that I'm interested in playing right now. So yeah, we can definitely go ahead and do that, and yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.